Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Adi and today we have another team report from Liverpool Regionals and another top player joining us. We have Stefan Mott. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on the show. It's going to be fun. I haven't actually done a team report in a hot minute, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. You had the 2 minute team report
Yep.
after Salt Lake City Regionals, which was great, but you did a little better with the team this time around. But first, I guess, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Stefan. I go by Pengi online. I am it's hard to know if I should still call myself a new VGC player because it's technically my first season, but the season's been going on for 3 years. So I started playing at the beginning of Gen 8, so beginning of 2020, end of 2019 kind of area. And yeah, so I made a goal to get to Worlds, and then COVID happened, and now we don't have locals anymore. But I already made the goal, so I have to do it. So I'm going to a bunch of regionals. So hopefully I can keep doing well.
Yeah, and I mean, you got what, top 32 at
Yep.
Salt Lake City Regionals. Now you got your top 8 finish at Liverpool Regionals, so you are well on your way to that goal with some really impressive performances. And of course, you used this team to get top 8 at Liverpool Regionals. So, do you want to talk me through your team building process, why you used Kyogre, and how you built the team?
Yeah, sure. So I started building this quite a while ago. It took me a long time to get comfortable in Series 12. One of the things I kind of like to do with new series and new formats whenever they get dropped is I'll just kind of try to build stuff that's funny. Because in the past, I have made some really, really good teams off the back of just like coming up with a dumb idea. But I couldn't really make any of that work in this series, and I was trying to make all this fancy stuff work. I tried like Ho-Oh, I tried like Reshiram, I tried all the other cool restricteds that theoretically might work, and none of them were working very well. I think I went on a personal record of 9 Swiss tournaments in a row without cutting, which was very getting me very frustrated at some point. And then I just decided, you know what, Kyogre. I'll just like try some Kyogre stuff. My a couple of friends and I built a couple Solgaleo Kyogre teams, which were like okay, because I was thinking, like okay, Calm Mind Ogre maybe with like AV Solgaleo, like that could be cool. It was okay. That was kind of the trend, right? Like every team was just kind of okay, and then I tried AV Ogre. I think Sableye told me that AV Ogre was like kind of nutty, and I thought it sounded really dumb, so I tried it, and it's actually just insane. Like AV Ogre is just nuts. I think it's the best variant of Ogre by far. I don't understand why it's not more popular. I think it's just like absolutely silly. And then I just kind of built around the AV Ogre. I ended up making this 6, the first version of this team, around the same time that Joe won Victory Road with this 6, which was really funny because I ran this in the IC and just like auto won a bunch of games because people just assumed it was the Joe 6, and almost all of my sets are different. So that was fun. But yeah, it's pretty standard. It's pretty bulky. I like playing sort of more balancy stuff, more positionally focused stuff. So having the ability to do that while also simultaneously having the ability to just kind of go just hyper aggressive in certain situations where, if they happen to lead wrong, I can just kind of max my Ogre next to my Zacian or something and just click buttons until they die. So I think it's a nice little balanced team. I think it works really, really well against most of the meta. I don't actually think I have any particularly unfavorable matchups. I think the worst matchup, I think, is like it is pretty close to 50-50. I'll talk about it a little later, but the reason I don't like it is that it's kind of like Jesus take the wheel. But it's I don't think there's any statistically bad matchups for this team, so I'm hoping that I can continue to use it for a while in the season. I'll keep using it until it does poorly, and then I'll try to figure out why it did poorly, and then maybe I drop it. But I'm having a lot of fun with it so far.
Yeah, and I mean that's just the hallmark of these Kyogre teams is that they are very solid across the board. One of the most powerful restricteds, two of the most powerful restricteds,
Yeah.
along with just like a bunch of good Pokemon that really let you play Pokemon. And that's kind of all you need to do is give yourself the room to outplay your opponents. But at the same time, like you said, even though Joe had won a tournament with these 6 Pokemon, you're running very different sets. You really can't, like, with the exception of to some extent like Rillaboom and Incineroar, all these Pokemon can run a lot of different sets. And so I think that definitely works in your favor, where it's a little more unpredictable. And so I guess, do you want to talk me through the individual Pokemon and why you ran the sets that you did?
Yeah, sure. So I can actually use this opportunity to touch on the differences between this team and the one in Salt Lake City as well, just for the people who did watch that video, because there are a few of them. And I guess we'll just go down the list. We'll start with the Ogre. Assault Vest Ogre, it doesn't die to things. This thing is so silly. Initially, the first reason why I really liked it is that Swordfish was a lot more popular a couple weeks ago. It's still very popular, but there's a lot less variance around it, especially around the IC when there was a lot of best of one teams running around. Things like Life Orb Ogre were popping up, a lot of these other different Ogre variations. And one thing that I really liked about this team is that Assault Vest Ogre just kind of won the mirror. And unless you're running into a Kartana team, Ogre by itself effectively wins the mirror, which is very, very nice because, there's still a decent amount of Swordfish running around. Somehow I haven't played it at both tournaments. I played Aaron Trailers, which is the one that was built to beat the mirror, so I don't really count that one. Somehow I've been avoiding that one, but I think overall the AV Ogre gives me a really, really good mirror. It makes it an incredibly scary max option. When you think about the physical threats in the meta, a lot of the physical threats in the meta are not really things that want to be hitting Ogre. Like Zacian isn't really doing that much to a Dynamax Ogre because at that point, Play Rough isn't really doing too much. Behemoth Blade is, 300 base power. That's cool, but you still resist it, and then you have maybe a Reflect Up and Intimidate option on your team. So Ogre is really just able to sit there on the field and just dish out a ton of damage. Now, moveset-wise, Thunder, really, we'll start with Water Spout and Origin Pulse. Water Spout and Origin Pulse. You need those moves on your Ogre. Water Spout's super nice because for those who are unaware, it gives you a 150 base power max geyser, which is super neat. And then Origin Pulse because, when you take damage, your Water Spout's not going to be doing very much damage anymore. So Origin Pulse is a great way to do big spread damage as well. Thunder is big because it gives you the mirror effectively. It gives you a really good way to hit into opposing Kyogre, and it also gives me sort of an option to deal with Amoonguss and things like that. One of the things that I have noticed with this team is that I feel like in a lot of matchups that are currently in the meta, my Dynamax is less, each individual Dynamax turn for me is less important than the Dynamax turns for my opponent. So I'm okay throwing a Max Lightning into an Amoonguss in order to get terrain up. I think that's totally fine in a lot of situations. So Thunder is really nice for that. It's also really nice as an emergency YOLO out in certain situations. There are some end games where, maybe they have a Zacian at full HP. They're not going to KO me in one hit. So I have one opportunity to maybe get that 30% paralyzed down. And then all of a sudden I'm faster and I can KO with the Origin Pulse. So there's some neat little things you can get with the Thunder as well. And then the big one, change number 1 from the Salt Lake team, Hyper Beam over Ice Beam. So originally I had Ice Beam predominantly to deal with the Whimsicott Sun variant that was very popular about a month ago. Basically what I realized was that I had no way of actually getting weather control into that. And because of that, I was really struggling in the matchup. And I sort of designed the line where I would go after the Whimsicott with Max Hailstorm first, gets rid of the sun so that, Zard isn't hitting me as hard, gets rid of the Whimsicott, and then I can just start using Max Geysers into everything. So that's kind of why I had that. But with Whimsicott not being a thing anymore, and with Gastrodon and sort of Rinya Sun being the more prevalent variation of Sun, Hyper Beam is super, super useful. It's really, really good into that whole team. It should 2-hit KO the Gastrodon, even with lefties recovery, as long as I'm not giving them terrain recovery as well. It's very, very strong into just a Zard max. If I'm worried about them setting Sun, that's not bad. I can offset the potential max Airstream, and then, Zacian is still going to outspeed things later on down the line, which is kind of neat. It's very good into Yveltal for the same reason. Sometimes with Yveltals as well, Max Lightning is kind of neat. You're going to do a decent amount of damage, but you're not going to KO it. So you might as well get the Hyper Beam onto it first, the Max Strike, lower that speed a little bit, offset the potential Airstream, and then go for the KO. So that's kind of where that comes into effect the most. It's also really good into Thunderous, which is dumb and sounds silly, but Kyogre will oftentimes bait a Max Lightning, so they'll go first. Then you hit them with the Max Strike. They get the Defiance boost. That's cool, but now you're faster, and then you KO them, so it doesn't matter at all. So that's another neat idea. I actually did use that in one of my sets. I think Hyper Beam is great. I think it's a really, really good move on AV Ogre. I think it's something that really should be run. I'm not going to say I wish I didn't bring it to Salt Lake, but it would have been good there.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the best max moves you can be clicking. And on a team like this, where, like you said, your Dynamax isn't as impactful, this is a way to make your Dynamax, generate that sort of momentum that you want. And also, it looks like your Zapdos is more of a support variant, so that really is conducive to maxing Ogre a lot more. And this is probably the best move to click when you are maxing that Kyogre. I guess the question I have about the Kyogre is, do you know what the EV spread does? And did you ever miss? I know like some of the things that Kyogre is often trying to do is outspeed something like Calyrex at +1 speed, which requires you to go Timid Nature. Did you ever miss that speed stat?
I did not miss the speed stat at all. As for the spread, I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. Because Sableye and I did this spread a while ago. The 76 speed is easy. That's to outspeed Thunderous after a Max Strike. And then the bulk is I'm gonna go out on a limb and I'm gonna say a bunch of the things that we live. I'm not 100% sure if this is exactly what the spread is for, but you're guaranteed to live Play Rough from Zacian, which is nice. I think you're guaranteed to live Max Lightning from Non-Life or Regieleki if you don't Dynamax. If I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the Ogre lives a lot of things, and you're going to live most of the things, honestly. It's one of the big things that I lived in Salt Lake City was the Ogre lived a double up from Play Rough and Giga Drain from Amoonguss, which was pretty neat. That won me a game against Wobbuffet, actually.
And that's why you run Seed Bomb on Amoonguss.
And that is why you run Seed Bomb on Amoonguss, unironically. That would have lost me that set. But yeah, I think that's generally the idea here. It's a lot of bulk. The 60 def and the 12 SPDF are for specific things that I can't remember off the top of my head. But generally, you can assume that this Kyogre lives pretty much everything, especially if it's maxed.
Mm-hmm. And then, did you ever feel like you missed Protect on your Kyogre?
No, not really at all. And that's kind of like also because of the spread, right? Like, if my Ogre's full HP, it's not dull. I'm not really that sad. And if it's not full HP and it's like 1v1 against like a Zacian that's faster than it, I kind of just feel like I probably got out positioned there. So there are ways to fix that going into game 2.
That's fair. I know I hate using Primals without Protect because I always want to reposition. There's so many things that KO it. Mm-hmm. And the response to that everyone has always told me is just position better. So, fair enough.
I will say also, the way I play this Ogre a lot of the time, the Ogre is probably not seeing play until very late in the game. There's a few matchups where that's not really the case, but what I found with the AV Ogre is that it makes for an absolutely insane endgame max. Especially if you can get them to burn 1 or 2 turns of their max or even their whole max beforehand. They're not going to have a way to KO it if that thing is big and all their things are tiny. Like that's not exactly a great position for the opponent to be in. So I would say most of the time if Ogre comes and I lose, it's because it's sort of started to snowball before that. And I never really feel like Ogre not having Protect is to blame.
Sure. And so, moving on to the other, presumably, the other Pokemon that you Dynamax a lot, the Zapdos. Can you talk me through why you ran the set that you did there?
Yeah, so this spread is my own spread. I based it off of, I think it was a Susei spread a while ago. He had the modest 116 special attack, which is really neat because from what I've noticed, obviously you lose the Heat Wave. So let's just get that out of the way. You're not hitting Zacian for tons of damage. But everything that Zapdos with the Life Orb 2-hit KOs this Zapdos pretty much also 2-hit KOs. Like, the only big one that you miss is like Citrus Ensign, which is not really in the meta anymore. Like, if they go hyper bulky Ensign, there is like an Ensign running around a little bit. I think it's just because it's like the default on Pikalytics, so some people are just like taking it. But it's like 236 HP, 236 SPDF careful. There, it's like a 60% roll to 2-hit KO. But like everything else, you're getting the 2-hit KO on with the Zapdos, regardless of the Life Orb. And you get so much bulk out of it. The speed stat, you miss speed tying the Zard sometimes. It's a little bit sad to like not hit that 100 base speed sort of a benchmark. But for me, one of the things that I always try to build around, especially more recently, is I try to remove as much RNG from my team building as possible, because I have very bad luck in a lot of these games. So I don't want to play for speed ties. I want to know where I stand. If I'm missing out on a speed tie, I don't really care that much, because I assume, unless it's something, like a Calyrex Shadow Rider where you have to go for the speed ties. If it's something where it's like not strictly necessary, I just assume I'm going to lose the speed tie, because you don't want to be surprised by anything. You don't want to have your line depend on, well, I hope I win this 50-50 on turn 1. So I don't really miss the max speed on the Zapdos. It creates some weird bad matchups that aren't super problematic, because it's things like max speed Dialga and Palkia, which on the one hand, that's not a great thing to struggle with, but on the other, I don't think good players will run those spreads. So I have not run into a single one of either of those in the last 2 regionals.
So what speed stat do you hit with Zapdos?
I hit 149.
Okay.
So the big thing with that is that's one of the main things that I changed off of the Susei spread that I based it on. You open yourself up to having Eerie Impulse Roost Spam as an endgame opportunity if like things went wrong. Maybe your Zacian got crit, something like that. You have the Eerie Impulse Roost Spam as a backup endgame. And one of the things that I noticed on the Susei spread is that at +1, he was not outspeeding Calyrex Shadow Rider, which is kind of problematic, because you need to be able to outspeed that to actually make that endgame work. So I went up to 149 speed in order to outspeed the Calyrex Shadow Rider at +1.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned Palkia, because I've had this conversation and these like sort of roundabout logic multiple times. In the first tournament of the year, I remember I ran 149 speed Palkia, and he got outsped by an Eviltal, and Justin Burns ran the team and lost in top cut because the Eviltal was like 150 speed. So then we started running 152 speed, which is just, max modest. And I definitely won some sets because everyone was running 149 speed. I outsped a Zapdos and won because of that. Got to click Quake before they got to Airstream. But then for Salt Lake City, we said, everyone's just going to run max speed because they want to outspeed things like Timid Kyogre. And then we cut all the way down to 143. So there's definitely like a lot of like, it's like not necessarily speed creep, but like a lot of metagaming involved.
Yeah.
And this is definitely one of the choices that gives you a couple extra points. But it just depends on what you think the metagame is going to be like.
Yep. And I will say there is another Zapdos variant that I've seen. I think it was Eternal Mania who came up with it. It's not that common right now, but it's a Life Orb Zapdos set with Hurricane, Thunderbolt, Heatwave, and Eerie Impulse on max speed, which I think is actually really neat, because I don't like the standard Life Orb Zapdos set. I don't think it's very good. Like, I mean, clearly it is, because a lot of people are doing well with it, but like, I can't vibe with it. I don't understand why people run that. But I think it's really, really neat to have that Eerie Impulse with max speed. I think Eerie Impulse is just so good on Zapdos. And if you can get those kind of support options without giving up offensive pressure, I think that's really, really nice. So that's another option. I do like the sort of Life Orb version. I might even add that to this team, because I don't actually use Life Orb, which is, you should really always have a Life Orb on your team. But yeah, so maybe I'll do that eventually.
Yeah. I guess they play a little differently, right? You have a lot more bulk, but I don't know. There's definitely trade-offs to it. And I don't know if Amoonguss usage is going up or going down. I feel like it's probably going down now with the increase in usage of Sun, where you really want your grass type to do damage to that Gastrodon, do damage to the Groudon, while being bringable into Charizard. So I don't know. There's this weird dynamic. Amoonguss is so much better when people don't expect it. Goggles, of course, does really, really well into it. And now, especially, no one's really running Venusaur on Sun, so it doesn't help there. There's just like a lot of trade-offs they have to make a decision for. But obviously, did Goggles come up for you at all in Liverpool?
Yeah, so Goggles comes up for me every single time I play Palkia Kali Ice, because the default lead into my 6 is a Mungus Palkia with Rage Powder Trick Room. So game 1, I will almost exclusively lead Zapdos Rillaboom, which sounds like a nonsense lead into somebody with a Kali Ice, but they're never going to expect you to do that. And then I'll usually, if they go for that kind of a lead, I'll usually just Eerie Impulse U-turn. And they'll be able to reposition for the first turn of Trick Room. Their Palkia is going to be -2. They're going to have to do switching around. They're not going to be able to max the Palkia. And I get 2 or 3 Trick Rooms out of the way just from the whole repositioning game. So that's already a great use of Safety Goggles on the Zapdos. And, there were people running Venusaur again in Liverpool. I did not play a Venusaur. I played Idshok, who got top 4 with Venusaur, but he didn't bring it into me. Which is like another thing where it's like, if Venusaur comes up again, all of a sudden, Safety Goggles on Zapdos is just nice to have. You don't want to risk them clicking the Sleep Powder button, because you can't hide the Life Orb. As soon as you use an attack, they know it's Life Orb. So.
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess moving on to the next Pokemon, do you want to talk me through, I don't know, the Incineroar or the Grimmsnarl, like some of your support options?
Yeah, so quick note on the pace, I realized that there is one mistake here. I changed Darkest Lariat to Throat Chop for the actual tournament. Super last minute thing I did on the plane. And really it was just because, like, why not is just the best way to describe it. I don't think I used Throat Chop a single time as like a Throat Chop move to like prevent parting shots, but it's nice to have that option, especially because my Incin is a little bit faster than most Incins in the meta. People who run speed investment Incin will probably outspeed me, but I outspeed all of the ones that are built predominantly for bulk. So it's the 44 speed stat's pretty neat. I do like having the first fake out most of the time. It's a little awkward whenever I run into somebody with a faster Incin, because it takes my brain like a second to compute, oh no, what do I do? But, it's generally okay. I think the Incin is like overall pretty standard with Shucka as well. It's really good to offer me switch-ins into things like Sun, offer me switch-ins into things like Dialga that might go for a Max Quake into the Zacian. And it's just really, really good at just causing problems for the opponent, as an Incin just generally does. It doesn't really do anything special. It clicks Fake Out, it clicks Parting Shot, and it intimidates things. And occasionally, you can max it. I don't think I maxed it this weekend, but I did have lines to max it in top 8. It just didn't play out quite that way. Because it's not a bad max option, especially against the Kali, Shadow, Zacian, Thundurus core. I think it's very, very good at maxing into that. If you can manage to stall out the Thundurus' Dynamax, bring in Incineroar, and then just Dynamax that thing, it's very difficult for them to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Max Darkness, obviously, really good when you have a Kyogre, when you have a Zapdos that can also do damage. Yep. You probably don't want to click Max Flare on this team nearly as much, but Incineroar, definitely. I know I was thinking about like running just like weakest policy Incineroar and trying to Dynamax it a lot more often, because low-key, it is a surprisingly good Dynamax into this Zacian-dominated metagame.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but Incineroar definitely got a lot of different things it can do, and this is a pretty standard set, all things considered.
Mm-hmm. And then Grim. I made a slight little change to Grim over the Salt Lake team. I added 3 points of speed to it just because of the Rise of Sun. It's really just another sort of why not kind of deal. This allows you to outspeed the Charizard if it's Thunder Waved, so you can get a Spirit Break into it. Very niche situation. A lot of the time, if you lead Grimmsnarl, it's probably going to die to the Wildfire turn 1 after setting up a screen or getting a Thunder Wave or something. But, and I don't even lead it into Sun, so I don't know. It's just kind of a why not kind of deal for that speed stat. I figured it's just worth it to have. Rather have it and not use it than not have it and miss it. So
right. Base 100s are pretty common. Palkia is base 100, Zapdos. Obviously, you don't have Scary Face, you have Thunder Wave, so you can't actually reduce its speed. But a lot of base 100s in the metagame that you might want to outspeed.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And then the only real point of discussion, I think, in the set is Thunder Wave versus Scary Face. That's always kind of a discussion. I prefer Thunder Wave. I don't like how easy it is for a good player to reposition out of Scary Face by just switching out especially with a Zacian. I really like that. That to me is a big no-no for Scary Face. And the other thing is, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but there is one matchup where it kind of becomes Jesus take the wheel, and that's because into weakness policy Solgaleo, you're... Now, I will say, I don't think it's an unfavorable matchup, statistically speaking. But one of the lines into the Spectrier lead, or the Calyrex lead, is that you need to Thunderwave everything, and you need to get your 25%. Like, if over the course of the game you get 25% full paras, you're probably fine. But I don't have a real way to deal with an activated Solgaleo unless I can get it to lose a turn here and there. So generally, the way I'll approach that is turn 1, I'll Thunderwave the Calyrex or the Spectrier so that it underspeeds the Solgaleo, basically giving me 1 extra turn of it not being boosted. Then I'll Thunderwave the Solgaleo. And then we pray. Like, that's the moment where it's just like, okay, well, let's see what happens. I did play that matchup once in both Salt Lake City and in Liverpool, and I won both of them 2-0. So I don't think it's an unfavorable matchup. It's just a very, very uncomfy one, and having Thunderwave there definitely helps. Because I feel like if you get a full para on, like, 1 or 2 turns on the Solgaleo, it doesn't even have to be the max turns, you're in a really good position. And if you don't, you're in a bad position, but you still have the speed control going, and like you still might be able to damage it to the point where like a Sacred Sword from Zacian can pick it up and stuff like that. So it's still playable without it. It's just very uncomfy. I don't like playing a matchup that way, but you know, you're not going to be able to have good, clean matchups into everything in the meta. So that's the one where it's like, all right, this is the uncomfy one. We'll deal with it when we play it.
Right. And there's also this been, just like with the Moongus, there's also this weird dynamic where people running Lumberry on Charizard, the original Rinya Bin of the Sun team had a Lumberry on Charizard. Now they're moving to either Charty Berry with Chungjun's variant or a Life Orb with Joe's variant. I don't know what Eric Rios ran off the top of my head. So people are moving away from Lumberry because people started moving away from moving to Scary Face away from Thunderwave on Grimmsnarl. So now you're kind of rotating back to where Thunderwave might be a little more favorable. So it creates this weird dynamic where are people running Thunderwave or Scary Face? Which one do you build your team to beat? I don't know. It's just a lot of metagaming involved there too. But right now, Thunderwave definitely seems like it might be a little stronger.
The other thing that I like about it as well is that, like, very rarely there are situations, and this did come up in Liverpool, there are situations specifically into Palkia Kali Ice where if I can remove the Palkia, oftentimes I'll get into endgames where, like, the Palkia player or the Kali Ice player will manage to get a second Trick Room up, and then my win condition is to self Thunderwave so I don't get spored. Like, that is a situation that also comes up. So I think that's also kind of important, whereas, like, that's just another option to have. I think Thunderwave gives you a little bit more in the way of options. Gives you counterplay into Sport, gives you potential counterplay into even into like Will-O-Wisp sometimes, into like a Will-O-Wisp like Calyrex Shadow Rider team. Like if you're running there with a Zacian, it may not be the worst idea to paralyze your Zacian. Like, so there's other neat options.
I don't like that because you got a 10% chance to miss, and then you got a 25% chance to not move. I would not feel comfortable side
it's not a
Thunderwaving at all.
comfy thing to do, but it's one of those situations where, like, especially when it comes to T-waving the to avoid Spore on the Kyogre, it's not comfy, but like sometimes it's the out, and it's nice to have that out as opposed to, well, he got Trick Room again. I guess I need to wake up turn 1. So
yeah, that's fair.
So, speaking of Zacian is next. Very bulky Zacian. I will mention the one change that I made here. I went with Swords Dance over Play Rough. This was really because I figured, more and more recently, all of the neutral things are being built to survive a Play Rough anyway. So really, you're getting, like, the real benefit of having Play Rough is, like, it's good into Zapdos, which doesn't get hit which doesn't get hit neutrally by either of the other moves. It's good into Palkia, obviously. But, like, that's kind of it, because the dominant form of Yveltal is Life Orb that's maxing. That's a 2-hit KO for Play Rough and for Behemoth Blade. Like, Kyogre is built to survive that, which makes it a 2-hit KO from Play Rough and also a 2-hit KO from Sacred Sword. There's so many things now that are not really getting value from being hit by Play Rough. So I decided to try Swords Dance. I liked Swords Dance in practice because it was very, very reliable at getting me game 3 auto wins in certain situations where, especially like to use Palkia Kali Ice as another example. Like if you're playing, I like to play very defensively against that with a lot of switches. And then in game 3, when your opponent's sort of used to you switching all the time, you're sitting there with a -1 Zacian on the last turn of Trick Room, and they expect you to just switch out to eat a hit and like get rid of the Intimidates. All of a sudden, you just click Swords Dance instead. Trick Room's over, and you're back to Intrepid Sword Boost. So there's like neat things that you can do with that. I will say though, I think that Swords Dance on Zacian, I said this in Series 10 as well, I think Swords Dance on Zacian is only good when nobody is running Swords Dance on Zacian. I didn't end up using it very much. I ended up using it, I think, one time where I immediately got crit the same turn in Liverpool, so it didn't really end up coming into play that much. I don't think I'll keep it going forward just because, now there's a team report with me showing that I have it, so it's not as good anymore. But I think I wanted to try it. I think Player Up is still a very good option, but since it doesn't get as many 1-hit KOs, I figured, why not go for something a little bit more wild for this one and see if I can catch a couple of people unawares.
Yeah, that's fair. And I know people have been experimenting a lot with that last slot on the Pokemon. I know that Tyrun also top cut the regional, used Quick Attack as the last attack on Zacian. I know that Max D's on stream in Salt Lake City ran Quick Guard as the last attack on it. And of course, Substitute is also a really common move that you can run. Do you think that one of those moves would fit better, or do you think you'd go back to Play Rough, or just keep Swords Dance on this team if you were running it in the future?
I think I'd go back to Play Rough. Like, I think Sub's okay. Like, the problem with Sub is that I don't think it's very good into any matchups except for Trick Room. Like, I feel like a lot of people get baited into clicking Substitute too much when it's in the moveset, when it's like not very good. So like a good example for why I don't like it a lot is that like my Zapdos is strong enough that this is another reason I don't think I need Life Orb. Unless it's like running into hyper specially bulky Zacian, it's a guaranteed kill on the sub. So with Max Airstream. So like there's a lot of things that are going to break that sub. I don't think it's that great outside of like stalling Trick Room. It's amazing at stalling Trick Room. If you don't have a Trick Room matchup, putting sub on the Zacian's a pretty good place to start. Like that's pretty good. But other than that, I don't know. I don't think sub is that good. I'll probably go back to Play Rough.
I don't think I agree with sub. I think sub is crazy. It lets you stall on max turns. It lets you like take advantage of passive play in the same way Swords Dance does a lot of times. It lets you beat Amoonguss really safely. But I mean, obviously, all those moves, quick attacks, a sub, Play Rough, even Quick Guard, like they all have merit in different situations. It's hard. It's hard to pick one. It's also really hard to play around all of them. And when your team doesn't really need that third move slot, like some teams need the Play Rough slot. When your team doesn't really need any of those moves, it's really hard to play around all of them.
True. I will say as well, I think one of the things that makes me not like Substitute for this team is that the team is already pretty slow for this meta, and sort of making it even slower sort of borders on making it too passive. So for this team specifically, I think that more offense on the Zacian makes a lot of sense because Substitute does sort of start walking that line where it's like, okay, am I spending too much time not applying pressure?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think like there are definitely a lot of other teams where sub is better than it would be on mine, I think.
Yeah. And then I guess moving on to the Rillaboom, you chose to run a Miracle Seed over like an Assault Vest set. Why did you choose to run the Rillaboom that you did?
Well, first of all, the Assault Vest had to be on Ogre. That was already the main thing. And I mentioned this, I think, in the 2-minute report in Salt Lake. One of the cool little calcs that this Rillaboom with Miracle Seed gets me is that unless it's like hyper, ultra, super duper, ultra crazy bulky Zacian, Grassy Glide plus Behemoth Blade picks up an opposing Zacian from full, which is kind of neat. The big change I made here is that I went min speed for this event. I went min speed after practicing with Cortex and realizing that I didn't think it was likely that I would run into Dialga, but if I ran into Dialga and Didi, having min speed Rillaboom auto won me the set. There was nothing they could do. And I feel like that kind of became, it was a little bit similar as well for like Indeedee Palkia teams, where it just enabled me to guarantee the Eerie Impulse with Zapdos on that on the big dragon before they did anything, and made it really, really difficult for opponents to kind of play around that as their lead, because generally speaking, maybe game one they lead the Amoonguss, and then they realize I'm Goggles, and then they adjust by bringing the Indeedee. Well, hey, now I have slower Grassy Surge and Fake Out, so good luck with that. And the reason I did that is that, I'm not seeing anybody really running min speed Indeedee. Everyone is just kind of running Modest. Just thinking, all the Rillabooms are faster anyway, so it's fine. So for me, I thought, what, let's try min speed. Worst case, it's a speed tie, but generally, it's not really going to be a speed tie based on what I've been seeing from a lot of the top players' pastes. So that was cool. It's very important into Rinnia Sun. I was actually playing around with switching this slot to Ferrothorn after looking a little bit more into Hobbit's Brisbane winning team. And then what kind of got me back on the Rillaboom train was when I was running some Rinnia Sun sets with Joe, he pointed out that like the Ferrothorn just doesn't get enough offensive pressure onto the Gastrodon. Because initially with the Ferrothorn team, we figured I was running a lot with Catfishy as well. And obviously your first draft of a line into Sun is not to bring your Ferrothorn. But we realized that actually running Ferrothorn was like kind of okay. And then I realized the reason why is because I was forcing it to put offensive pressure into the Rillaboom or into the Gastrodon. So Rillaboom can do that without sacrificing your max on a 4 times weak to Charizard Mon. So Rillaboom kind of came back for that reason. The main thing that I might consider here is dropping U-Turn for Protect. I really like U-Turn for like repositioning stuff, but like I also feel like Protect on Rillaboom would be really, really beneficial to this team. So up in the air a little bit on whether I want to do that. But overall, Rillaboom is really great. It provides an alternate max option. It's not really that great in the current meta as a max option anymore, but maybe 3 weeks ago when everybody was running Palkia, Cali Ice with Mimikyu instead of with Amoonguss. Oh, that was great. The Miracle Seed Rillaboom kills Mimikyu through Disguise with an Intimidate. So, okay, like you can switch in your Instant. That's fine. I'm still not letting you get Trick Room and then auto-winning the match. But Mimikyu's gone, which makes that a lot more sad for me now.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned putting Protect on the slot. I noticed you have a total of 1 Protect on the team. How did that work out for you?
Honestly, fine. Like with the bulk that we have, and screens, Intimidate, Eerie Impulse, AV on the Ogre, hella bulky Zacian spread, double Fake Out. There's enough ways to mitigate damage that it really didn't bother me too much. The only thing is, I do play the Palkia Cali Ice matchup a little bit YOLO when it comes to like one of the things I like to do game 1. And maybe even subsequent games is I like to bring Zapdos, Rilla, Zacian, and Instant. And then I consider myself very good at playing a read-heavy game. So then I'll be in that position where it's like, okay, I have 2 weak to ice, 2 resists. I have 2 weak to ground, 2 resists, or 1 immunity. And I'll just try to outplay them with defensive switches to stall out the Dynamax on, ideally, the Cali Ice. And it works out pretty well, but it would be a lot easier if I could click Protect with Rillaboom sometimes. So that would be a little nice.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so you talked about your game plans into some teams, but do you want to go over how you approach some of the more common matchups in the metagame? Most notably, I guess, the Sun matchup that everyone wants to hear about now, into the Mirror, into different Kyogre variants, and then, of course, different like Palkia variants, I guess.
Sure, yeah. So into Rinnia Sun, I ran this set about 15 this matchup about 15 times with Catfishy, who actually played the Mirror against Chongjun at the Salt Lake regional. And then I ran a couple of sets with Joe as well. I might have run Rinnia Sun with a couple other people as well. I ran a lot of Rinnia Sun in the lead up to this event. And basically, we figured the way to go was essentially to lead Instant Zapdos and bring Rilla Ogre in the back and just ignore the Zacian. And that's one of the things that I've kind of been getting a little bit more used to over the last couple of months is just like not bringing Zacian sometimes. Because initially I was like, all right, you don't need your restricteds, like both restricteds every matchup. But the one I was leaving a lot was Ogre. But with the rise of Rinnia Sun, it's really Zacian that's sitting out a lot more. And I think there were actually quite a lot. The reason why Swords Dance didn't really come into play that much for me this weekend is that Zacian didn't see the field in a lot of different sets, which was an interesting thing that I didn't really expect to happen. So into Rinnia Sun, the idea is basically you get Instant Zapdos. You're able to just kind of slow down the game a little bit. You can punish an instant lead, or you can punish a Zacian lead. You can punish a Groudon lead a little bit with that Intimidate. If they lead straight up into Zard, then you can there's a number of ways you can play it. I think one of my favorite ways to play it is kind of what I like to do if I'm up 2-1 or if I'm up 1-0. If I'm up 1-0, I kind of just like to click Parting Shot plus Eerie Impulse into the Zard, because then I'm like, all right, well, one of these is working, and then your max is neutralized, and I'm kind of okay throwing away the Zapdos, because the idea here is you want to be maxing the Ogre. So the entire game plan is just position the Ogre for a late game max and use Rillaboom to bully out the Gastrodon. So you have to retain the Rillaboom, max the Gastrodon, and you don't necessarily have to KO the Gastrodon, because you have Hyper Beam, you have Max Strike to be able to deal pretty solid damage to it as well with the Kyogre. But yeah, I mean, the matchup really does revolve around getting Ogre into that max position. And after, the Instant Zapdos Rilla Ogre line for game number 1 is really solid. And then depending on how they're playing it, if they're not bringing the Gastro, maybe you lead the Ogre instead. You can get a little bit risky with that. I think one of the things that is really, really dangerous is if you can position yourself in a way where you have Rilla Ogre on the field, and they have and this happened a number of times actually in Liverpool, because I played a lot of Rainier Sun. I would try to position in a way where I had Ogre and Rillaboom in front of the Groudon, and then I would just double click Grassy Glide Geyser into the Groudon. It's like, okay, well, you can switch. Then you're losing your Gastrodon to the Grassy Glide anyway. You can not switch, and then you're losing your Groudon and the Weather War. That's fun to be you. And I think that's one of the ways that you can kind of abuse the fact that the Rinya Sun team has also not very many protects on it. So, on some of those important mons, obviously Instin's not going to have protect. Obviously, the AV Groudon's not going to have protect. So, I think it's even fine sometimes if you can find yourself in that position to just click Grassy Glide into the Instant, because you're basically putting yourself in a position where it's all right, you have to switch the Gastrodon in here to not get swept by the Ogre. So I'm going to punish that by clicking Grassy Glide into that slot, regardless of what's in that slot. And I think that's one sort of way to work around that and just apply a lot of pressure and start to really snowball in that matchup.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you said you played that matchup a bunch at Liverpool. How did you end up doing against it?
I did not lose to Rainier Sun. I think I played it 4 times, or 3 or 4 times.
Oh, wow.
I don't think I lost 1 game to it on Origin Pulse misses. I played 1 very close set against it, but it was also I think we had about 20 misses between the two of us. It was an incredibly hacksy set both ways. But yeah, I other than that, I don't think I lost a game to Rainier Sun. And that's mostly because the amount of prep I put in and the just the amount of high level prep I got from all the people who worked with me. So that was very, very nice to see that pay off.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it looks like you teched really hard for it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, everyone's asking, how do you beat it? I don't think that the kind of gimmicky ideas that people are talking about necessarily do that well into it. It's just such a well-rounded team. And what you need is a team that like this one, really well-rounded, but also has built-in answers to it, and your game plans really well. And then, I mean, you still got to play Pokemon, but it sounded like you had enough tools that you were able to outplay your opponents.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of why I really like this team a lot. It's not so much focused on, I have gimmicks for all these different popular matchups. It's really just it's well-rounded enough that I can play Mons. And if I play Mons better than the other person, I'll win, which is, I like trying to play that way. So works out pretty nicely overall. I like that a lot. And a lot of the other matchups, a lot of the popular matchups are kind of that way, right, for this team, where it's just all right, I have... I do have some lines. I didn't have lines actually going into Salt Lake. I really didn't prep hard for it because I wanted to avoid burning out with 2 in a row. But yeah, I mean, I also have so some of the matchups that I have lines into really are the Rinya Sun one now. I worked a lot on Life Orb Yveltal. We actually played a couple sets for that, so thanks for helping me prep Life Orb Yveltal. I did run into it. Benster was running it actually, so. I played against Benster, and basically what was actually kind of funny is that in prep, because I played some sets with you and with Animus to prep this matchup, and what was basically settled on was Zapdos Grimmsnarl as a lead with Kyogre Zacian in the back, is really good. And if I max the Zapdos and it's next to a Grimmsnarl, they can't really max the Yveltal comfortably because there's no good targets for Max Darkness. They have to use Max Airstream, but there's also no good targets for Max Airstream. What was funny is that in the set against Benster, I just ended up maxing Ogre instead, and it was very, very difficult for him to get rid of the Ogre. And I think part of that was because I wasn't in quite as good a position to max the Zapdos. I just wanted to try to slow the game down a little bit more. Because I went for a hard read game 1 on Eerie Impulse onto the Yveltal, which worked out really nicely. And then because of that, I didn't max the Zapdos. I maxed the Ogre and was like, wait a minute, this is actually really good. I think I should just do this game too instead. So that's kind of how that went. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think it's easiest to talk about sort of the standard ways to play in general, as opposed to individual matchups, right? So I would say the two most all-around leads you have with this team are Incin Zapdos and Grimmsnarl Zapdos. Up until a couple weeks ago, I was on the train that Grimmsnarl Zapdos is the best lead in the entire format. I think it's kind of fallen off a little bit because Zapdos isn't quite as all-around amazing anymore, but it's still pretty good, especially if you're running into certain matchups where the Zapdos gives you really, really good sort of presence on the board. I think one of the biggest ones is I think Grimmsnarl Zapdos is really good into Zacian and Thundurus. And I know that's sounds a little weird, but basically the Thundurus has to max. If the Thundurus is max over, you've done your job. All you have to do in that matchup is make sure that the Thundurus does not just steamroll you in Dynamax. And with the Grimmsnarl Zapdos lead, you can just click Reflect. My Zapdos is bulky enough that it'll live 2 turns of double ups from unless unless he uses Max Knuckle or something. But I think that's a really, really good way to lead off there. If the Grimmsnarl goes down to a Behemoth Blade, it opens the door for you to max Airstream with the Zapdos and protect with your own Zacian or something. And yeah, there's a lot of different ways to play that out. You have the opportunity to bring in the Incin once you've gotten rid of the Dynamax, because then you don't really care too much about the Defiant anymore. So having Zapdos as that sort of early game anchor is really, really nice. Being able to get Airstream boosts on Zacian can sometimes just end the game. It's not going to be a very common way to win the game against top players because they're going to be prepared for something like that. But if you feel like you're the better player and you're in Swiss round 4 or something, sometimes there's going to be a matchup that allows you to just switch the Zacian into a max Airstream and win. And actually, my win and in my game 3 win and in went that way against Idchuk, where basically he was running Life Orb Eleki, and I noticed from the amount of damage he did to my Zapdos that it was not that heavily invested in special attack. So game 3, I just switched my Zacian into a max Lightning from Life Orb Eleki to get an Airstream boost on it and then outspeed the Eleki the next turn and KO it. It lived on 20, so I don't think it was a roll. I think it was the correct decision. But sometimes you can just do that. You can just switch into an Airstream and win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes it, I think, having an understanding of what the common leads are, even if they're not structured game plans into every team, makes it a lot easier to pick up the team. So I definitely look forward to trying this out. As you said, it's one of the few teams that I think has, or one of the teams that has the most playable matchups into the Rinja Sun team that everyone wants to beat. So definitely a team that I encourage everyone to try out. And yeah, so you've talked about a few of the matchups that you've played in Liverpool, but were there any other notable matches that you wanted to talk about?
All right, so I have my trusty notebook here. If you're an aspiring VDC player, don't go to an event without a notebook, because not only will it help you with your game plans, it'll help you remember when Adi asks you about games, and it'll help you have cool things to talk about. So the big turning point for me, actually, I'm just going to talk a little bit about early on in the tournament, because one of the things that was wild to me is I can't believe that this is the tournament that I cut, because I was so jet lagged. I went to bed at 11:30 p.m. and was like, this is going to be great. And then I woke up at 1 and couldn't go back to sleep. So I had about an hour and a half, 2 hours of sleep going into this, off the back of also not having a lot of sleep the night before because I'd been traveling the whole day. So I was just absolutely exhausted. And then in round 2, I got so in round 2, I made what I think is the coolest play I've ever made in a tournament, and basically auto won game 3 on turn 1, and then lost to multiple back-to-back crits from a -2 Calyrex. So basically, what happened, I was playing Buenti, and he was playing Palkia Calyrex. And I led off Grimmsnarl plus Incineroar. And the idea here was he was going to go Amoonguss and Palkia, which he did. And I figured that he would read a pretty free Spore plus Trick Room. So I maxed my Grimmsnarl, 1-8 KO'd his Palkia, and ate the Spore on Fairy Terrain. So that was a pretty cool thing to be able to do. And it worked. It worked really well. I got the Palkia KO. He got really frustrated, and then he crit me with his -2 Calyrex on my... that was the one where I used Swords Dance on the Zacian. I was like, oh, this is going to be fine. And then I died. And then I sent out my Incin and also got crit with that one. So I was very tilted at that point. And then round 3 was the Sun matchup I talked about a little bit that was super, super, haxy on both sides. And after losing game 1, I lost game 1 because I was so tired and tilted that I forgot my leads into Rinya Sun, even though I ran it about 5 hours in prep. So I just lost game 1. And then I was there was a moment in game 2 where I was just zoned out, staring into space going, I mean, if I drop now, I can go sleep. That's really nice. Maybe I'll just go sleep. That'll be fine. And then I ended up winning that one. And then the round 4 set against Benster was kind of where things sort of picked up, because Benster's a really good player. And he was running the Yveltal Life Orb team that I lost twice to in Salt Lake, and also that I prepped a bunch for. So being able to win against that team was really, really big for me, because I was like, all right, the prep worked. Mm-hmm. Senpai Adi helped with his prep work.
I helped a little bit.
A little bit.
It was probably mostly Animus.
A little bit. We'll give credit to everybody. So then the fun one, I played a couple more matchups. There was an easy 2-0 against Rinya Sun. And then in round 6 at 4-1, I roll. This is also the worst thing, right? You have to consider that at this point, we're 7 hours into the day. I'm on 1.5 hours of sleep, super jet lagged, not tilted anymore. Already in round 4, I was the last match done because of how many moves we were missing. And then I roll up against a guy running triple recover. This guy had Ho-Oh, Gastrodon, Porygon 2 with recover on all of them, max Steel Spike on Ho-Oh, and AV Groudon. We were the last ones done again. I think every single game went to timer. I thought I had a really easy matchup into him, and game 1 I kind of slapped him, and then game 2 he just adjusted really well. Actually, he didn't really adjust that well. He just played really well. He just kind of gamed on me game 2, and I was like, oh god. And then game 3 was a great game where we were just kind of sitting there, and I was clicking Thunderbolt for about 15 minutes to chip stuff, and then suddenly it said 3 minutes left in the game. So I was like, I guess I should probably Dynamax to stall 22 seconds off the timer. And I won 4-3 in game 3. It's just dumb. Oh, Lord. But yeah, so then in the end, I played the Jesus Take the Wheel matchup with the Solgaleo against Mateus Demura. That was an interesting one. I feel like Solgaleo is super manageable if you can somehow manage to not let it get weakness policy. Game 1, he did not lead Spectrier, so it didn't get weakness policy, and I was able to win, which is great. And then game 2 was kind of the one where, I paralyzed all the things. I paralyzed every single Pokemon on his team with Thunderwave, and hoped that I got enough full paras. And in the end, I actually didn't. I almost did. But then he clicked Psychic Fangs in an endgame 1v1 against my Rillaboom instead of Sunsteel Strike, and I lived on 2 and KO'd him with Woodhammer. And I thought that he'd forgotten to PP max his Sunsteel Strike, but he told me after that he just didn't click it for some reason. So we take those. I felt a little bad, but that wasn't game 3, so I felt less bad. Mm-hmm. And then my round of 8 match was basically I wasn't allowed to play the video game. Chef crit me turn 1 on my Dynamax in both of the games he won, so there wasn't really anything I could do about that. We worked lines really hard. I need to shout out Sven for waking up super early to help me prep lines for that one. The lines we prepped were 100% perfect into what he did, but we got crit, so it didn't matter. Just a little sad. It happens.
That's Pokemon. Yep.
Yep. It kind of worked out for game 1. He crit me so hard game 1 that I literally wasn't allowed to use a move, so I just got to use the same strat game 2, and it worked. But yeah. Well, we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, top 8, still a very impressive performance, especially for your second regional, right? I don't know if you went to.
I did play Dallas and Collinsville in 2020. But
okay, so yeah, still top 8, really impressive performance. You played a lot of really good players along the way, and I mean, you seem like you know this team really well, which is I think the most important part of doing well at a regional. And you had a good Sun matchup, which is also the second most important part about doing well at a regional nowadays. So yeah, those are all the questions that I have. Did you have any final words or shout outs that you wanted to give?
I should really shout out. I'm not going to shout out everybody who helped me prep because we'd be here for another 4 hours. But I'll shout out the main people who invested a lot of time. Sableye helped out a lot with. He's helped out a lot with the team from day one. Like I'll like consult with him on changes that I make here and there. But he also helped me out with prep for this event specifically. Catfishy ran about 15 sets with Rinya Sun into me, so he must have been getting very bored, but it was very helpful. So big shout outs to Brock. Blub and Brady also, like Blub and B. Smithy, were also part of the Discord chat, sort of like the prep dream team. And then big shout outs to my friend Chalky, who's always who's pretty much my main practice partner. And yeah, just too many people to name. So those are the main ones. I'll also shout out Animus for helping me shore up the Yveltal matchup after kicking my ass with it in Salt Lake City. So he didn't have to do that. I appreciated that a lot. Didn't keep his secrets. And that's basically it for this one. I guess shout out to my esports org, Apprentice Esports. I got a jersey now. I didn't have it in time for Liverpool because it was delayed, but yay, at Indy I'll have a jersey. Cool.
Yeah.
So that'll be neat.
Yeah. And of course, if you want to check out Stefan on Twitter, do you stream on Twitch still?
I think you do. Yes. I'm actually going to be pivoting my content to be more VDC focused as well. So my Twitch is Pengy with 2 Ys, and my Twitter is at Pengy Twitch with 1 Y on the Twitter. And I also have a YouTube channel that I'm not super active on right now, but I'm going to be working on as well. So it's also just Pengy. You'll find it.
So go check out Pengy. The links will be in the description down below. You can go give him a follow, subscription, all the different, social media, whatever. And yeah, so thank you again for coming on the channel. I really appreciate it. And congratulations again on the really impressive performance. Yeah, of course. Anytime. It was great talking to you. Yeah, I learned so much from this conversation, so I really appreciated it.
Cool.
Yeah, and until next time, I will see you all later.